Welcome to Tail Learn Code. Here there will be tales about software development, learning from each other, code to build solutions. And now your host, Chad Green.
Welcome, everyone. As anyone who's been watching these will notice the screen's a little bit different. We're using some different technology today. This is interesting. We're using Blue Jeans, which I had not heard of until yesterday when Deven mentioned that he wasn't too crazy about Skype.
I'm a bit of a tinfoil hat privacy nut.
I was just about to say, so one thing I've known about Deven for years. Number one, his Twitter handle is infosec812, right? So it's he says it right there in his Twitter handle of what he's all about. So for those who haven't seen these before, welcome to Tail Learn Code. We're doing a series of interviews with speakers that will be speaking at Code PaLOUsa. Code PaLOUsa will be August 19th and 21st this year, and it'll be completely online. Because we have to be online. I actually would have preferred to be in person, but that's just not the reality of the world this year. But we've been doing a lot of work to make sure it is as real as possible. A lot of networking possibilities we've been added in. Because it's funny, we're all introverts. I find most of the tech industry is introverted, but everyone loves going to conferences, right? And everyone, it's all of a sudden we turn not so introverted. Until like the evening, then all of a sudden we go back to our rooms. It's like, okay, just leave me alone for the next 6 hours or what have you. But so today, not tonight. I was interviewing last night. Now I'm gonna get used to him back in the daytime. But so today I have Deven Phillips and Jeremy Davis, who will be tag teaming a couple talks, or at least I know both of you are talking at one. I'm not sure if Jeremy's helping on the other one or not.
Yeah.
But no, go ahead.
Just a little background. Jeremy, my colleague here, is a chief architect at Red Hat and has a specific focus on software development and helping customers with that. I work in the cloud native runtimes practice at Red Hat as an architect. And so Jeremy had produced a workshop / demo that is focusing on event-driven architectures with the newly released Quarkus runtime. And we're going to tag team on that one. And then I have another talk I'll be doing about how we're finally reaching the trough of disillusionment around microservices and when you should make the decision to use microservices versus a modular or a majestic monolith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll definitely get to your talks here in a moment. I definitely I'm really interested because, so the Quarkus and all that type of stuff, it's obviously more on the Java realm. As Deven knows very well, I'm a .NET developer, true and true. And, pretty much I'm not changing.
You'll be proud of me, man. I've been working in .NET Core lately.
And you've actually been okay with yourself?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
No, .NET Core, I'm sure enough. It's been a while since you and I have talked about Microsoft and .NET. .NET Core is definitely something completely different, right? They went a different route with it, in the name of trying to be cross-platform, from the outset.
Yeah.
So
my team is actually working on some enablement materials around .NET Core and how you can be more cloud native, faster feedback, faster delivery, better outcomes. Yeah.
I apologize. Just because I have my calendar that I'm streaming doesn't mean that people don't ping me. So I will say I actually did have to bow out of a meeting today at the same time because they were like, "Oh, this is the only time it's available." I'm like, "Well, I was already in my calendar and I'm not available." But so let's just get to know you two real quickly. So tell us about what you're doing. But let's start with Deven. So give us the quick recap. Well, so to pick you first, let's start with you. Just a quick recap of how you got started in this career and what's brought you to Red Hat.
So how I got started in this career is I was, like you said, an introspective geek as a child And it was more fun to sit at home and play on my Commodore than it was to get ridiculed by other children. But in high school, I went to high school in Silver Creek, Indiana, or Sellersburg, Indiana, at Silver Creek High School, and we had a really progressive teacher there by the name of Bob Shaw, who spent his summers every year going out and beating the bush for funding to get grants. And so we actually had 5 years of computer science in high school. So I learned C, C++, a little bit of Fortran, Pascal, BASIC, all before I even graduated high school, and I loved it. And graduated high school, started to go to Indiana University, realized that I did not like structured university education at all, and I joined the military and learned electronics. And after I came out of the military, I went into the IT field in entry-level positions like network technician, running cable, moved up to a network administrator, systems administrator, and eventually automated my sysadmin responsibilities to the point where I could spend a lot more time coding, and finally transitioned back over to being a full-time software developer about 12 years ago, and have been doing that ever since, and have been a huge advocate and user of open source software, and got involved in that. And a couple of years ago, I was approached by a hiring manager at Red Hat, and he actually asked me in my final interviews, like, normally at this point I ask somebody why they want to come to work for Red Hat, and I'm looking at your background and your involvement in open source, and the real question I have is, why didn't we hire you a long time ago?
Right. Great. What about you,
So
Jeremy?
that's how I came to be where I am now.
Okay, great. So what about you, Jeremy?
So like Deven, I enjoyed hacking around as a kid. In college, though, I studied political science and philosophy. So I would no computer science degree. After that, I was playing in bands because I liked doing that more than working, and began working for .coms as a web monkey. Got my first job. I went in for an interview, and the guy that was going to tech check me was at his desk, and he like threw his hands up and kind of yelled, "I can't make this work. See if you can fix this," and just like stormed off. So I sat down, got his code working. He came back. I walked him through and showed him working. He's like, "Yeah, okay, you're hired." So that's how I got my first job, right? So for trial by fire by making JavaScript work. And I still like front-end technologies a lot. I don't get as much time in my current role to play with them, but I try to stay on top of things. And I really love the fact that we have so many like tutorial sites that have exploded like all over the web, right? Because I love, just at least to try to do a quick tutorial on any kind of new JavaScript framework around. So I've been in technology since the .coms, graduated into back-end Java stuff, was always open source. I mean, open source was around, right? You could download, MySQL and actually like play with something, right? You didn't have to have a license. You didn't have to have, any kind of expensive tool sets, so using VI, got into Java pretty early. I guess, to thousands, which wasn't too early for Java. It's been around longer than that. But I got into Java pretty early in my career and have mostly been in Java, although I've been paid to write, I've got a list. I've been paid to write code in a lot of languages. So C, Python, Visual Basic, VB Script. I've done a tiny bit of .NET stuff a long time ago. So, although I recently downloaded Visual Studio for Mac, right, which is sounds funny still to say, even, right? I've been doing some C# recently, Java, JavaScript, Ruby, Perl. Wrote a bunch of Perl for a while. So I've written a lot of different languages, but mostly Java, and then some front end stuff. Been at Red Hat for 10 years. I work with our customers to design solutions using our products, obviously, but a lot of different techniques and a lot of different approaches.
Well, cool. Well, that's really, it's interesting. I've done about half a dozen interviews so far in the last 2 weeks, and a lot of people definitely come from the industry from different places. Right? They didn't take the quote unquote traditional path, which I'm starting to question. What is the traditional path, right? And sure enough, Deven, I relate with you, on your path, because so as a senior in high school, I was mature enough to realize I was not mature enough to go to college, and so I joined the military, right? which was the right decision for me, right? But hence I'm definitely on the non-traditional because I didn't go to school at all, right? It's which is nice to know that companies don't care about that as much as they used to.
That's one of the things I was going to call out. I was like, Jeremy's story sort of reemphasizes that you don't have to have a CS degree to be successful in the meritocracy that is the modern technology world. Mm-hmm. And I really love that it is a meritocracy. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. There's still some decent gatekeeping, based on race and gender and background. And we all need to be improving on that. But you start to see research like, I don't know if you've read Dr. Forsgren's book, Accelerate, and they actually did a bunch of research, and one of the outcomes of the research is they determined the more diverse your developer team is, the better your outcomes, and they improve significantly.
Oh yeah, I've been arguing for a long time that, we can't just be a bunch of mid-40-year-old white guys writing software. It doesn't work, right? Because we don't look at everything the right way, and because our user base is not all mid-40-year-old white guys, right? Of course, I'd still say mid-40s. I'm really close to not being in my 40s at all. But still, I'm gonna keep on saying
we resemble that remark.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep on saying that for as long as I can. But no, that's great. That's cool to hear from where y'all came from. Let's go talk about the talks because I think we're gonna talk quite a bit about these. But let's talk about let's actually talk about the Microsoft microservice. Let me tell you what. Writing a paper about how we're using Microsoft technologies to write microservices is a mind blow, right? Because the whole time I was mixing the two words up all the time, right? But
correct, yeah. Autocorrect fighting you all the way, right?
Well, just my head. Okay, which word am I trying to type right now? But let's talk about
you'll appreciate this, Chad. I'm going to give you a nod on my microservices versus monoliths talks, and I'm actually planning on doing my demos using .NET Core.
Well, cool. Again, yes,
I know that Code PaLOusa actually has a bit of a tendency toward more .NET developers and front-end developers, so I want to make sure I'm coming to them where they live.
It has. And that's. As you well know, that's something we've fought with from day one. Number one, it's hard because that's the world I live in, and so running this event, and then the other. One of the facts of the matter is Louisville is a Microsoft town. It definitely is. I know as we were building this schedule, of course, and I've told the story before on the stream. The hard part about building this year's schedule was we went through several layers of denial as to what was going to happen with our event. Because when it started off, it looked like, well, number one, when we were doing call for speakers at the time, when it first started, it was like, oh, well, that's something over in Asia. It's not something we have to worry about too much. Be concerned, but it's probably not coming over here. And then, it's definitely coming over here. And as we were picking sessions and everything, which took us a little bit longer because we were trying to figure out what was going to happen. We went through. We're definitely having a physical event. Maybe we need to look ahead at a hybrid event. To we're having a hybrid event. To we can't even have anyone in person. All right. Long story short, figuring that all out of okay, let me make sure we pick even more non-Microsoft talks or oriented talks because now we're not just in this region. Hopefully now we can get people from all over the world. But still, Code PaLOusa is a not Microsoft, but mostly Microsoft conference.
I'll say from personal experience, I've seen, people talking about Ruby. I've seen people talk about Java. I've seen people talk about Python, front end. I think you do a pretty decent job of trying to get a diverse group of technologies.
So I think we're entering a bit of a different time too. For so long, the language was tied to the platform, right? Mm-hmm. And right now we're in the transition, obviously, of moving to the cloud. And what you're developing in is no longer really tied to where you're going to deploy.
Sure.
And I think this is opening a really big world up because if you combine .NET and Java together, you have virtually almost the entire real enterprise ecosystem, right? Everything else put together is a very small thing, or specialized. Data science obviously is Python, right?
Right.
But if you put together .NET and Java, so I think I've noticed a lot of interest in Java people starting to pick up some C#, .NET people picking up some Java, because now all of a sudden you're employable everywhere, right?
Yeah. And it's really fun to go into those customer conversations from a Red Hat perspective, where we talk to them about, let's move your .NET workloads to Kubernetes and Linux, and they look at us and go, "What? You guys do .NET?"
Yeah.
And we're like, "Yeah, we've been doing .NET for years."
Well, of course, one of the whole,
because you don't generally think of Red Hat doing .NET.
Well, and on the flip side, the oddity that was it like 55% of Azure is Linux, right? Actually, I think it's even more than that now, because it's
right.
I know, like at the company I work at, our web servers are still Windows, only because they were built several years ago. If we were if we were to build them today, they would be Linux servers, because it's silly not to.
Well, I mean, it's cost effective. The security controls are quite a bit better. The overhead is a lot lower, so you get more bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually a lot of it's a struggle, especially for people like Jeremy and I. People generally think of Red Hat and they're like, oh, the Linux company, and they do Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and that's the only thing they know about Red Hat. But Red Hat's been doing more software development than Linux for a decade, Jeremy, right?
Yeah, it's been more than 10 years since Red Hat acquired JBoss.
Yeah. So like most of our consultants, they're generally involved not with infrastructure, not with operating systems. They're involved with helping customers build software in whatever language the customer wants.
Mm-hmm.
And like Red Hat we've always been a major contributor to Tomcat, which nobody ever really knows that, but we've employed a lot of the Tomcat developers, number of the Tomcat team leads, and that goes back even prior to the JBoss acquisition.
So that breadth of experience that we've had lately has kind of led me to this conclusion that we finally hit the trough of disillusionment around microservices. People are starting to realize, well, microservices aren't as great as they're cracked up to be, and they don't always make sense unless you're, a FANG company, your Facebooks, your Amazons, your Netflix, your Googles. And even in those cases, you're starting to see articles and talks from people within even those organizations saying, yeah, for certain things, we still go monolith.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's easier to organize code in a monolith. It's easier to organize method calls through a monolith, and you get those really good strong time compile time guarantees. And what they fail to realize a lot is that people jumped on microservices because, we can have teams working in parallel without being blocked by one another. I'm like, you can do that with monoliths too, if you make your monoliths modular, or then what we call the next stage is a majestic monolith that you can deploy in containers or in the cloud easily.
And to be fair, Martin Fowler and Sam Newman and the guys who originally started writing about microservices did warn us about this, right? So, to be fair, it's not really like a new concept, right?
But I mean that's how tech goes, right? I mean, we find this pattern we really love, and then we drive it to to its death, right? Because it has to be the solution for everything, right? I remember. This was several years ago, and this is when microservices was just starting to take off. I mean, it wasn't nowhere near where it is today, but and I was interviewing for a company, and the guy asked me, "Well, what are your thoughts about microservices?" I'm like, "To me, it's just a whole bunch of hype, right?" and he was like, "Well, what do you mean by that, right?" And I clarify, right? It's just it's like, well, it's like it's supposed to solve all our problems, but it's not looking at it's not looking at these root problems that it's not solving. So that was actually a very interesting conversation that I had.
Yeah.
But
I think I've had that same conversation a few times myself.
Yeah. Now the funny part is they actually killed that job because that company wanted to go all microservices and basically didn't want to hear anything bad about it. So,
yeah. And I'm having similar conversations these days around serverless and functions as a service, right? people are like, oh, it'll solve everything. I'm like, have you thought about how you're going to manage and coordinate all of those functions together?
That's the first.
That's worse than microservices.
So I do a lot of talks about serverless, and in particular Azure Functions. And one of the things I was talking about near the end, no, usually near the end, but it is well, here's the one problem you're going to have. Now instead of having a couple services, you're going to have a whole bunch of them, right? Because if you build them right, that's the whole thing. If you build them right, they're really, really small, which means you're just got so many of them. And at some point, you're going to get to the point where it doesn't actually work, right? It's just too much.
Well, and the way we've been oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, yeah, I was just to say, in some early conversations I had with people were very much focused on the concept of a microservice, and we'll rewrite everything as a microservice, and only 100 lines of code, or you can't scroll past one scroll. And I think this is where like some of the discipline around doing domain-driven design with your microservices makes more sense, because you shouldn't break it up into 100 lines of code as an arbitrary number of how big your class file should be, right? It should serve a purpose. Like, which is really different from saying we're gonna have 1,000 microservices just because.
Yep. Yeah, and I think one of the ways we've been talking a little bit about functions as a service and serverless is it's great for rapid prototyping, trying out a new concept, adding a new feature capability, and getting it quickly iterated to test the business value, making sure it's got good product market fit. And then once it starts to stabilize a little bit more, then meld it into maybe a microservice or even back into a monolith. So they're all useful. It's just making sure that you don't go, oh, it's all serverless or it's all microservices. Mm-hmm. As you get further along in your career, I find the answer to just about every question these days is, it depends.
Yes. Well, I mean, basically all three of us are architects, and what is the most work, almost as much as consultants. It depends is so much part of our vernacular, right?
Yep.
There's
never any good hard and fast rule. Like, I was just talking to some of my colleagues that I'm mentoring, some of the junior consultants, about service layers in applications. And like, if you're coming from the monolith world, you had these separate service layers that were distinct from your data access layer, that were distinct from your model view controller, so that you could keep that business domain information somewhat abstracted from the APIs and stuff. And in a microservices world, that doesn't really make much sense, because the microservice sort of is the service layer. Mm-hmm. And people were still adding like a separate service layer, and they had these really anemic model controllers or controllers that were just like one line of code to call a service layer. What's the point?
Right.
It's another way to fail. You've introduced a new potential failure, right?
Well, and another level of confusion for your junior developers that look at this one line of code and say, what does that even do?
Yeah, sometimes we try to simplify things. All we did was make it more complex, right? Uh-huh. I see that a lot, right? It's like where I'm at, where I'm at right now. I've just been here a little bit over a year, and it's one thing I was dealing with is previously they were doing a lot of abstractions, and so it's just made it harder to go through the code, because now I have to go through like 8 layers of code to actually get down to what I really wanted to get to.
Yeah. I'm really starting to believe in a lot of what, I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Evans, the guy that wrote the original book about domain-driven design, mm-hmm. or Vaughn Vernon, who has written some more books about DDD. I'm really becoming a huge fan of the way they look at it. Is abstractions are not a bad thing, but abstractions should make it easier to understand the business context. So like, if I'm a new developer coming into a project or a junior developer coming onto a project, I am not going to be able to understand the intricacies of double entry accounting. So I want those abstraction layers to help me be a little bit detached from that. Mm-hmm. And as I gain experience, as I learn the business that's related to the software we're writing for that business, I can get deeper and better understand that. And that's where those abstractions come in really handy, is allowing you to slowly move into this really complex business domain.
Yeah.
Writing writing software, in my experience, is relatively easy. It's understanding the business problems that's the hard part.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, writing software is easy. Writing good software is not so easy, right? It's, and I think you hit the nail, the head of the nail. You got it dead on. I'm fumbling that analogy, but the whole fact that understanding the business side of everything's, and which is on my teams. That's one of the things I try to emphasize. Is, well, let's make sure we understand what the team, what the business really wants out of this, not what we want out of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the hardest thing as a new developer coming into a new team, whether you're, a junior, mid-level, or senior developer, an architect, regardless, if you're coming into a new industry, a new business domain, you're going to look at that code and go cross-eyed because you don't understand the business domain.
Right. So cool. Well, let's move on to the other talk. Sure enough, this has been an area that I've been really interested in. That's event-driven architecture. Funny thing is I mean, as an old VP programmer, I've been doing event-driven architecture, since forever, right? Because that's what VP was driven off of. But obviously, this is, we've taken that term and we changed it a lot in the last couple of years, and I've been loving it. I've been building several things with EDA, but here, I mean, you're definitely using some tools I gotta admit I had not heard of until I saw the submission. But again, because I don't play in the Java world. But so I mean, let's talk about this talk and more important. I mean, let's talk about Quarkus and such. What exactly that is.
All right, so I'll tell you. So I last year I gave a presentation at a conference in Chattanooga, and it was just on Quarkus, right? So just basic sort of introduction to Quarkus talk. And I was going to do live coding, so I said I'm going to build an app live in real time here. And so I started off the talk. I said, so who's a developer in the room? Most of the hands go up. Like, who's a manager or architect, right? Mostly developers. And I said, so Java guys, and like 2 hands go up. Mm-hmm. And so I said, LAMP stack guys? Like, no, like, we're all Microsoft guys, all Microsoft room. So my initial thought was, okay, well, hopefully this will be interesting. I am building an app live in real time, and the chance to watch another human being fail, right live in front of you is always kind of fun, right? So I thought, okay, they'll enjoy it at that level, right? So I build my app, right? And I build the application. I go through the entire application, run through and build it. And when the talk's over, I thank everybody. And I was really amazed. Probably about a quarter to a third of the room hung around afterwards, like making sure they had links, like wanting to go home and play with Quarkus, which I found kind of amazing. So I was like, like great. I'm glad you guys like the talk and it looks fun. And I was pretty amused to see that people who were coming from outside of the Java realm found this interesting and found it was something they would want to play with. So hopefully, even if you're a .NET person or coming from a different language, this will also be interesting to you. So Quarkus does have some very interesting things. So a quick definition of what Quarkus is. Our engineering team, as we really bet big on Kubernetes a few years ago, when Google went to open source their internal project, Borg was the project, right? And they reached out to Red Hat to partner with them, and contacted us. We were at the time looking at replatforming OpenShift, which was our PaaS. We called it a PaaS back then, right? That was the industry term. And we decided to partner with Google. We said, okay, this looks like really good stuff. Well, our middleware, or our apps, now we're called app services. We changed that name, right? But the developer stuff, right, began thinking in terms of what does it mean? Because we had the term cloud native, right? What does it mean to be Kubernetes native? How does Kubernetes really change the world? And one thing that really changes is all of a sudden, when you deploy to the cloud, memory is expensive again, right? That hasn't happened. Memory's been cheap forever, right? Like, when was the last time you cared, how much memory costs, right? All of a sudden now you get your AWS bill and memory is expensive again. And this coincides. So one thing we wanted to do was, especially in Java is known for being a memory hog, right? It started for embedded devices, and paradoxically, if you're running on an embedded device, you have a small amount of memory. So the goal is just grab as much as you can and hang on to it, right? Because there's not that much to begin with, right? Well, Java took that into, the server space. So it grabs huge amounts of memory. That became really expensive inside of the cloud world. So one thing we wanted to do is, how do we strip that down? And so part of that means pulling libraries out, coming up with a smaller version of, the Java runtime itself. But another angle to that came out of Oracle's labs. They developed something called GraalVM, which allows you to compile your Java code down to a native image. So we use a native Linux image typically, right? We're Red Hat. But you can also do a native Windows image. So you can compile your Java code. You write regular Java code just like you always have. And then you run it on this new JVM. And even without a special compilation, it uses significantly less memory, usually around about a third to a half as much memory as a traditional Java program. And then when you compile it down to native, it's about 10%, because you're talking about a native executable binary. And so that was part of the impetus for Quarkus. The other piece came out of the Java EE space, which Java EE has been around for a long, long time, since the late 90s. But it has done a nice job of being very stable and backwards compatible. So if you made a bet on Java EE and you wrote an application in 2008, it pretty much still runs, right? And even though, some of those specs have changed over the years, you have a long time to update. That's very good for the enterprise. The negative part of that is often it was very slow to adopt new technologies, right? So things would take a long time to get into Java EE. And so developers were usually chomping at the bit to say, I want to do new stuff, right? And so part of what we want to do with Quarkus is sort of build on that heritage of Java EE, but not be tied to that. So we don't support all of the long tail stuff. There's no soap inside of Quarkus. We're not worried about doing things the old way, right? And it allows us to experiment and pull new things in faster. And part of that you'll see also one of the other topics in this talk is Kafka, right? So streaming and reactive kind of applications are very much, front and center inside of Quarkus.
Yeah. The other cool thing about that GraalVM capability is that the actual just-in-time compiler. I don't know if you've ever dug into some of these virtual machines like the CLR, like the JVM. They do what they call just-in-time compilation, where they actually muck with your implementation code at runtime to make it run faster. Like it'll notice, oh, you never use this branch path in your code. I'm just going to optimize it away, and it'll disappear, and your code gets faster, and things like that. So the JVM, the CLR, a couple of other virtual machines do this. Well, the Graal just-in-time compiler is actually customizable. You can write your own Java code to customize how that just-in-time compiler affects your code. So you can get really, really optimized, which is very, very cool.
Mm-hmm. And it does, when it compiles you down to native, it strips out anything extraneous. So like Deven mentioned, it looks through your path of code and says, oh, this isn't used. We're not even going to have it in the binary.
Yeah.
Right. So
and the startup times are insane. So a compiled native image Quarkus application starts up just as fast, if not faster, than a native C, C++, or Go binary.
Wow. So now
it's a really different paradigm.
Sure. Now coming in this, I mean, if I was to come to this, do I need to understand event-driven architecture coming into, or are you going to provide some introduction to that?
You do not have to understand event-driven architecture at all coming in. So we will provide an introduction to that. That's where this came from. The idea for this presentation and workshop came from one of our colleagues, Clement Escoffier, who, in fact, I think that's when Deven and I first met, was because we both were really enamored of Vertex, which is a reactive toolkit for the JVM that Red Hat has sponsored for a long time. It is baked into Quarkus, by the way, so a lot of Quarkus under the covers uses a lot of Vertex stuff. But we both were enamored of Vertex and enjoyed doing reactive programming. Clement Escoffier, one of our colleagues, was the lead for Vertex, or was on the Vertex team. And he wrote a reactive demo to illustrate using a coffee shop, right? So you'd place your orders, and your order would go into the coffee. And he was showcasing the difference between using REST and using messaging or Kafka, right? Because with REST, obviously, if your barista goes down, you just kind of back up, right? With messaging, you can, your barista can go down. It's okay. You just wait. And when you pull a couple more baristas online, and now all of a sudden you start processing quickly. So we took that example and fleshed it out a bit more. We've added some stuff to it. And we're looking at the relationship between Kafka, which is a new paradigm for messaging. In the Java space, we're very used to traditional JMS. And Kafka is a really different way of looking at things, but it opens up a lot of possibilities for building your applications. And one of those is it marries really nicely with event-driven architecture. So instead of saying, I created an order, go do this, do this, do this, and coordinating it from one place, we just say like an order has been placed event, right? And then you have like an order ready event, and then the system can react to that in different ways.
Yeah. And I would add, like, one of the reasons you're starting to see a lot of enterprises latch onto Kafka is for resiliency. So, like, if you're doing traditional REST or even gRPC or GraphQL, it's request response. And if a request gets lost, you're stuck. Kafka as a messaging solution is vastly different. It has this concept of time-shifted queues. So if you submit something into a Kafka queue, or a Kafka event stream is the way they refer to it, it's there. And if you need to go back and retrace your steps, you can. It's like a log database there that you can go back as much time as you've configured Kafka to keep history for and reprocess that information, which plays in really nicely with certain architectural decisions like CQRS.
Yeah, I know. I've been really impressed with Kafka. I've been using quite a bit. Now, I've been using it under the covers. Microsoft actually has done a really good job with their what they call their Event Hub, which uses Kafka, under the covers, and you can quickly get into it, which is nice. They built it so you could build your quick apps, but then when you need to get deeper in there, it's real easy to get into the Kafka, underbelly and make those kind of changes you need to make. So I've been having a lot of fun working on those.
Yeah, and in the Kubernetes world, there's now this Streamzy operator that makes it just as easy to run it on Kubernetes. So you deploy this operator, and through that operator, you can say, give me a Kafka cluster. And the operator takes care of standing up Kafka, making the number of replicas, setting up memory and all that, storage, all of it. And so you as a developer get quick and easy access, like as if you're running in the cloud using a managed service from Azure or AWS or Google.
No, well, both those sound like really good talks, and it's I think people will get a lot out of those, right? And it's actually kind of funny. So the microservice talk, that's actually a string of microservice talks. It ended up being what we ended up picking. I had enough to have a whole full day, just basically a whole track of microservices.
Nice.
Looking at all different types of aspects of microservices. It was funny when I picked the sessions. That was not the intent. But as I was building the schedule, I'm like, oh, look, I have so many here. These actually, and so we tried to arrange them in a way that, from the beginning to, more and more, I don't want to say advanced, but, building on to that type of knowledge. So we should make for an interesting day for for those who really, like I say, either who've been doing microservices for a while, or who, hey, I think this is awesome. Let me find out how awesome it is, and like I said, probably be disillusioned with. It's great if you do it this way, right? Or if you don't, if you don't go down these traps. So, well, cool. Let's learn a little bit more about you all. So, I mean, what do y'all like to do for fun?
So I have 2 kids. So I mentioned that I used to play in a band. My daughter also is very musical. She's much more talented than I am, but my daughter and I play guitar together all the time.
Oh, cool.
And she's one of those people that used to annoy me, who can kind of pick up a new instrument instantaneously and sort of hear, a song and then just play it on like 3 or 4 different instruments. I used to struggle to get like anything done, which probably dovetails the fact that I like punk music a lot, which is good because, that's kind of the limits of my skill set, usually somewhere around there. And then my son and I, my son's a Boy Scout, and we go camping a lot.
Oh, cool.
And we like doing a lot of outdoor stuff.
Nice. And if you can't tell from the background, Jeremy's an Atlanta United fan.
And Atlanta United fan. I like soccer a lot too.
That's the other thing Jeremy and I bond on. We're both big into soccer. I go to the Louisville City matches, and I support West Ham United. He goes to the Atlanta United matches, and you support and Arsenal, isn't it? Man U. Oh, Man U.
Whatever.
As for me, I've got a 7-year-old son. We like to go swimming. We like to play Minecraft together, and he is learning to code in Python at age 7, which is a lot of fun. He really enjoys playing around with. He wants to be daddy's little assistant, and so he likes to learn about code.
Mm-hmm.
He wants me to teach him Java so he can write Minecraft mods. And I'm like, let's do some more Python first. Let's get you used to thinking logically about code, and then we'll look at Java.
Right. But that's one of the fun parts for the kids is stuff like the Minecraft mods and the other game mods you can do. I think that's a great way. You talk about the Commodore. I mean, that's the way how we learn, right? We were getting the magazines and coding the games.
Oh man, Byte magazine was the bomb.
Yeah. Between Byte magazine, I forget some of the magazines I got, but I remember getting you spend the whole day typing the code, and then of course there was an error somewhere in that code, so you had to figure out where you didn't type it correctly, right?
Yeah, kids have it too easy today. They just copy and paste off of Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
We had to read it out of a magazine and have our brothers dictated while we typed.
I came very good at being able to see it and I learned the keyboard really well. I don't type correctly, but I know how to type very well because I had to learn the hard way. Actually, funny story. So when I joined the Marine Corps, so I was aircraft administration. So basically, I did records for aircraft. And when you went to now, of course, this is 1990 was when I went through training and everything. And the first thing you get when you go to your actual school for your job was typing class. Back then, most people didn't know how to type, and they started off. And the thing is I forget. I think it was like 2 weeks that they have set aside for typing class. And then once you type out, because it's all once you can get to typing like 30 words per minute, whatever it was, then you were done with the class. Basically, that's when they put you in work details for until your main class started. And I was smart enough to realize that, right? And so they asked, well, who has experience with typewriters? Well, actually, I had never used a typewriter before. Because I grew up with computers in my house. My father was a software developer, right? So I didn't raise my hand, right? And so I went through the class, and ended up typing it out at like 110 words per minute. And they were like, now, wait a second. When we asked if you ever had typing experience, I've never used a typewriter in my life. It's like, how in the world can you type this fast? I'm like, well, I've been using computers since I was 7. Now, I can only do that because it was civilian teachers. I would never have done that with a military teacher.
Yeah, it's funny. We just did a big project with the Marine Corps, and actually it was a joint project, Marine Corps Air Force, related to aircraft operations. Mm-hmm. So, you'll probably recognize this. When they schedule flights for both training and mission commands, they use a big whiteboard with magnetic pucks, and they call it a puck board.
Yep.
The military has been trying to replace that with a software system for decades.
I'm sure, yeah.
And have failed miserably like 8 or 9 different times. And we went in and they had their first successful real-world deployment of a software solution for this for a team that we helped mentor.
Awesome.
That is actually made up of uniformed service members from the Air Force that had never really done professional software development before. It was a lot of fun to work with that team.
Yeah, I did something similar a while ago. I was doing some work with the Army out of Fort Knox, and while the goal was to build this application, there was a secondary goal of teaching these soldiers how to write code, and that was a lot of fun. Although the Army didn't keep that around long enough, they decided that they were just going to do contractors, and I kind of lost. I lost interest in that job. I'm like, yeah, it was more interesting when I was teaching people how. I'm pretty excited because they've actually kept that team together and expanded it. And so those uniformed service members, they actually changed their job specifications. So 2 of them were pilots and the other 3 were enlisted flight crew managers, things like that. Mm-hmm. And they are now software developers in the military. No, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really
cool. It is really cool. And so they've actually started forming up a new small command somewhere in Colorado for that group. And it's a joint command with Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy guys all working together, building software.
Wow, that is really neat.
For their colleagues, which is really neat. Mm-hmm. Really, really neat.
Yeah, I was the rogue guy who wrote applications for us to use in our squadron. But that was never sanctioned and everything, but we got, it helped us a lot.
My experience is that the incentives for military contractors around software and IT the incentives are all wrong. They want to be there forever, so they never want to deliver a finished product. Whereas the actual soldiers, they want something that works and makes everybody's lives easier. Right. So the incentives are correct.
Having been a DoD contractor for 13 years, I know that feeling. Problem was, it seemed like the government ones were the ones who wanted projects to last forever.
Sometimes feels that way. I've done a lot of public sector and military contracts since I started with Red Hat, and it's a little shocking to me the way they think about contractors. Is like, we're going to throw money at you, and with a vague concept, and you'll give us what you give us, and we'll take it anyway. It's a little odd sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious. So as two folks closer to my age than the others, spread some wise wisdom on how do you balance work life balance.
Don't surf the web, or limit web surfing time. I mean, it's very easy to start reading an interesting article or something and waste an hour, right? So you have to be very plugged in when you're at work, right? And be very focused. And that also, I guess, as you kind of rise and your career gets tougher. I really miss, my last heads down coding job before coming to Red Hat. We had, after lunch was our sacred time, right? So there were no meetings, no phone calls, from 1 p.m. until, 5 or 6 was just heads down coding time, which was really nice. Get your meetings out of the way in the morning, and stuff. And then when you got back, you were just like plugged in. And that can be harder too, as your title gets longer and people, look to you for stuff, you get pinged a lot during the day. That can be difficult. But yeah, turn off distractions, turn off social media, turn off chat, block out time on your calendar.
Yeah. And then the opposite side of that is having a dedicated workspace, especially if you work remote, that is where you work, so that when it's quitting time, and I have an alarm set on my phone to tell me it's 5 p.m., it's quitting time. And at that point, I walk out of my office, I close the door, and I am not at work anymore at that point. I'm there with my wife, with my son. We eat dinner together. We go play in the pool in the backyard. That's family time, and I really make a sincere effort to avoid any kind of work distractions. Yeah. So it's really nice on the Android phones nowadays. They've added this work profile concept that you can actually just disable your work apps.
Oh wow! I didn't know that was there
at certain times. I think it's since like Android 9, and you can set up a separate profile within your phone. And I put all of my work email, my work chat, my work-related applications in that profile, and I just turn it all off at quitting time for the day. Oh. And I let all my colleagues know that if it's a die-hard emergency, you can still call me or text me on the phone, but you can't reach me via email, via chat, any of those.
That's an interesting point. I was recently on a panel of IT leaders. I think I might have gotten invited by accident because I got somebody reached out to me and said, as the chief architect at Red Hat. I said, well, I'm a chief architect at Red Hat, although I like the sound of being the chief architect at Red Hat. But anyway, on this panel of leaders from a lot of different companies in the Southeast and nationwide too. But one of the things that everybody talked about was, as we've all moved to working at home now, a number of these people brought up the fact that their employees are working too much, and they realize they're going to burn people out. And so, people are logging in, for a big chunk of Saturdays and Sundays. They're going, 10 days in a row without, taking a break. It's very, when you work from home, it's very easy to pop your laptop up again after dinner, right? It's very easy to do that first thing, get up with your coffee and start checking emails, and then, you're on again after dinner. And, which is great for productivity in the short term. It's not sustainable long term.
No, exactly.
And so finding that work-life balance at home is a really key thing that a lot of Americans are going to have to are having to deal with, right?
I was at a session.
And I would add on to that, like having that away time to let your subconscious chew on things. I usually come back with a better answer in the morning anyway.
No, I mean, to the point of what Jeremy was talking about, I was at a session listening with Scott Hunter, who's charge of everything .NET for Microsoft. And one of the things that they, so if you've been following along with Microsoft, they announced .NET 5, which was a very big release, and they've ended up pulling some things out and moving to .NET 6. And primary reason because of the pandemic, just it was counterproductive because you would think, well, you should be able to get more stuff done. And what they were actually finding was they were getting more productivity out of people. It was their single people who was causing their problem. They were so productive because they had nowhere to go, so they just kept on working. And so he was saying, as an organization, they had to actually look at that and tell people, hey, your day's done. Don't work anymore. It'll be there for you tomorrow morning, right? It's and it's tough. I think most developers, not all, but I think a lot of developers get extremely passionate about what we work on. I know I definitely fall in this trap. I get so passionate when I'm working on. It's not unusual. It's funny. So my wife comes home at 2:30 in the afternoon, and so I do stop for a couple minutes. If I'm not in a meeting, I stop for a couple minutes, talk to her for a couple minutes. But it's not unusual then for me to get back on my desk, and I probably should set an alarm because, it'll be 6 or 7 o'clock, and she's like, "Do you want to eat dinner?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what time? What was it, like 4 or 5 o'clock?" She's like, "No, it's 7." I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, let's eat dinner, right?" But then I do the whole thing of once I stop for dinner, then it's time for the family and everything. My other side of it is I don't sleep much. Whereas my wife does. So she goes to bed. I'm not ready to go sleep. So I end up doing some more work, and that's worked well for us.
I'm in a similar boat. My wife likes to sleep in, and I can't sleep past like 6:30 in the morning, and so I get up early, and that's like my focus time from 6 to 9, 6 to 10. But what's really interesting to me is, and one of the things that makes me proud to work for a company like Red Hat is Red Hat actually went a direction nobody was really expecting. They instituted what they're calling Red Hat Recharge. And so every quarter they're giving us extra days off.
Oh, wow.
And they're, what is it called? They're like flex days. So if you can't take the designated day off because you need to support a customer or do something else that's work related, you can just take it on a different day anytime.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I see more and more consulting firms, or at least they're consulting parts of their firms doing that. Because for the longest time they did it. All right. I mean, I worked for HP for a long time, and that was one of the hard parts, right? We were it was normal corporate business days were days off, and then but obviously if your customer was working, then you were working. The even weirder part was like when again working for the government. When the government was off, but normal, they were like, well, we kind of still expect you to work. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I can't go to the office. The office is at the government, facility.
Yeah. Well, and for us as well, Jeremy, like he was commenting about traveling all the time, but Red Hat, we're generally expected to travel. Mm-hmm. And so with being socially isolated, and Red Hat has said, we're going to prefer remote until at least January 2021 right now. And we will revisit that conversation at that point. Mm-hmm. So we're having some tough conversations with our customers about, hey, we're not going to send consultants on site for several months now, and let's see if we can figure out a way to continue working forward. And thankfully, our customers have been really, really responsive and supportive of that concept. And they're actually starting to find that they like it a lot, which is fantastic.
Well, sure, because it promotes them being able to work from home, and so I will find it interesting. Look at this like 2 years from now, once we're finally past this pandemic and everything. What happens to work from home? All right. I mean, for years we heard that, well, that's not really possible. We need people around. But most companies are doing just fine, with 90+% of their companies, employees. Most people in the tech sector, I should say, right, are doing just fine, right? And work from home is working well. Now, I also think in a couple more months, I think we're going to see where, people are going to have to get a little bit more structured with it. Because I've talked to people who working from home is brand new. and it was definitely a big wow factor to them, right? You know, it's a lot of the same things you talk about, you know, having a dedicated workspace, and you know, I talk about that heavily, right? It's not to say you have to always work in the dedicated workspace, but there are days I'm in the den on the couch, you know, with a the laptop on my lap, because I just don't want to sit in my office chair for the day, right? But you know, having it, but it's also because I'm usually by myself in the house during the day, so it works just fine. But you know, having that dedicated space definitely makes a difference. But like I said, I'll be curious to see what happens, and we're already seeing the big names. I mean, you know, Twitter's already said that you know, they're not going to force anyone to go back; it's optional to them. I think Facebook has made some similar statements. You know, Microsoft, I know, is still trying to figure out what they're going to do. It sounds like what Red Hat's doing.
Actually reversed course big time. So, like a couple of years ago, IBM made a big push to insource everybody. Everybody had to come and work at an office. And since coronavirus, IBM has done a complete 180. They're like, yep, everybody go work from home, and we're probably not going to make you come back to an office afterward.
One of the biggest things, so Red Hat, because our software is all open source, the way that we have typically hired people for our product teams is we look when our engineering managers get headcount, they look at who's sending pull requests in the community, right? So that, you know, they already have this person's code, they're already contributing to the project. And Mark Fleury, the guy that founded JBoss, used to joke that if someone was going to work 8 or 10 hours, you know, during the day for somebody else and then come home at night and work on their pet project, you know, he would hire them to work on their pet project, and they'd be, you know, happy to work 12 hours a day. Right? But our teams have always been very distributed, right? So because if the project is mostly run in North America, but we have a lot of commits coming out of Brazil or out of Belgium, then the person gets hired in Brazil or Belgium, right? They don't have to relocate.
Right.
And so we have product teams that are distributed all over the world. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes we see as people begin to really embrace working remote or remotely. You realize, like, you can hire the best people whether they're in your town or not, or whether they can conveniently get to your office or not. It's going to be a huge sea change, I think, for corporate America.
Yeah, no,
I find it just phenomenally rewarding every day at Red Hat that I get to work with people in Germany, in Brussels, in Brazil, in China, in Vietnam, in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, every day I interact with people from all over the world.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. You know, it's funny. So the company I work for, we're 100% remote, but like the tech team is all here. It's just happened to be, you know, because you know, the guy who hired from one, most everyone he hired, you know, he either knew them or he got them through references of, you know, people he knew, right? So it's I mean, Devin's the only one who understands, but you know, the closest, our farthest away person is London, Kentucky, right? Which is basically a 2-hour drive from the city, right? You know, and for those outside of Kentucky, yes, we have London, Kentucky. Actually, we have London, we have Paris, and then because it's Kentucky, we have Versailles. Anywhere else in the world, it's pronounced Versailles, but in Kentucky,
there we go.
Yes, but in Kentucky,
now I'm repping the Ville.
Yeah, in Kentucky, we call it Versailles.
I'm disappointed. I was really looking forward to coming to Louisville. So
yeah, I've talked to several folks
online too. But.
Yeah, I've talked to several folks who this will be their first Code PaLOusa, and I love the city. I mean, that's part of the whole reason why we do Code PaLOusa is to show off the city. I mean, one, to show off the tech in the city, but just the city itself. It is a great city. You know, it's some because of some of the decisions that were made that were bad decisions, right? I mean, so our city never grew to the level it should have been. You know, it's interesting when you look at like Louisville compared to Indianapolis and Nashville and Cincinnati. You know, if you look earlier in the last century, the 3 cities or the 4 cities were all about the same. But Louisville made some stupid decisions. That's why it never grew as much. But some of that has also made it a really great city because we kept some of that smallness of our city.
Oh, Jeremy, you can still come and we'll go drink some bourbon, man.
Okay.
Yeah, and
we'll head down to Main Street, hit Bourbon Row, and you know, take a couple sips at each stop.
That is one of the great parts about being in downtown Louisville. Is that there are plenty of great bourbon bars if that's what you enjoy.
Absolutely.
So
and there's plenty of great little restaurants right along that same strip too.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because 20 years ago, downtown Louisville was.
Oh yeah.
Well, 20 years ago,
I remember
it went through a dip.
Growing up around here.
Well, yeah. So it was
as a kid growing up around here, I avoided downtown Louisville because the waterfront smelled bad. It smelled like rot.
Right.
And then they finally cleaned it up back in the late 1990s, 2000s, and now the waterfront's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It smells nice. It's crisp and clear, and yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, so any party thoughts, as we wrap up for the day?
Don't get sucked into the hype too much.
I like that.
I'm just looking forward to the conference, and we're going to afford attending some sessions too.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I really appreciate you all signing up to speak. It's because we have awesome folks like you. It makes this conference really great, and also definitely appreciate you joining me today for this quick little interview. Been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being involved with Code PaLOusa. I think I've spoken all but 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the very first talk I did at Code PaLOusa was on VertX back in the very first
Sounds
year.
About right, yeah. Sounds about right.
So that ought to give Jeremy an idea what Code PaLOusa is. 10 years this year?
Yes, this is our 10th year.
Yeah. But 10 years ago, I was working in VertX and talking about it at Code PaLOusa. That's quite a while. God, I'm old.
Yeah, was that 1.0? Was that version 1?
It was early 2.x. Yeah, early 2.x. So very early 2.x. Yeah, that's been a while. It's funny. I told Julian Biet, who is the project lead for VertX, that, and he's like, holy crap.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And so for